to the third episode of CXO Spice Talk. Today's topic is how to dominate our market with a book. We have our guest speaker, Bryan Heathman here. Bryan is the CEO of Made for Success Publishing and the author of 2 marketing books. Bryan worked for 3 Fortune 10 companies and now shares his writing and marketing know-how with authors, producing 3 Wall Street Journal bestsellers in the past 3 months. Wow. It's an honor to have you here, Bryan.
Absolutely, Helen. I've been excited to talk to you and have an interesting discussion about dominating market niches. So this should be awesome.
Yeah, so tell me about your origin story.
Yeah, well, you know, an origin story is always kind of an interesting thing when talking to, just about anybody. But mine started back, when I was in college. I studied economics, and I was fascinated with monopolies at that stage. And I was so fascinated with monopolies that I decided to work for one. And in my corporate career, before I started my own companies, I worked for 3 monopolies. And I learned a lot of information working for these very large companies about, going in, dominating a market, and extracting extraordinary profits from those markets. Today, as a book publisher, I regularly, just like you today, write checks to the dominating monopolies. I write checks to Google for my pay-per-click campaigns. I write checks to Google for my my suite of email and calendar communications. I write checks to Microsoft. I write checks to Facebook for advertising. I regularly write massive checks to Amazon for a whole variety of things. So today, a lot of the work that I do is supporting the ecosystem of these very large companies. But one of the interesting things that came up to me when I started my first company, and this was in the late 90s, it was a .com, in the first .com wave, was that there is opportunities to create invisible monopolies. And as such, I'm currently in my business, just like you in your business, I'm writing checks to these invisible monopolies, such as Atlassian or Intuit for my financial systems, or Slack or Salesforce. So we're all in these various ecosystems where we're supporting these companies. And today, Helen, I wanted to talk about ways that you can extend the growth much quicker for a new product release using a book. And of course, I'm a book publisher, but I'm a book publisher that thinks in terms of scaling products quickly and doing it in a way that can dominate a market.
That's excellent, Bryan. And a lot of what you do is creating fame and fortune for others. How do you do this?
Well, it's interesting. In the introduction, you mentioned that we've created, literally within the last 3 months, Wall Street Journal bestseller status for 3 of our authors. And rumors have it that there might be another author that's going to be climbing the mountain of the Wall Street Journal. And that author, of course, is Helen. So it's interesting to talk about, but a book is what I consider a free pass for getting famous. So as an entrepreneur running a company, it's very difficult to get earned media. And by earned media, that means like, Good Morning America or Forbes or Fast Company coming to you and asking you to contribute to their platforms with information. But as an author, you get a free pass to this earned media. So it's a great opportunity. Now, for people that are looking to use a book to extend their brand. That's one goal. But there's a lot of people that I work with that are using a book to extend their career. In fact, I just got a text um, this week from one of the authors, and he said, this was his quote. He goes, "The Heathman halo effect surrounded my life, and I was promoted to president of my company. I do believe that the best-selling credential from my book that's been circulating social media has played a part, especially when my CEO's endorsement was on the back cover."
Wow.
Okay, so it's an interesting example of how, from a career perspective, you can use a book as an accelerator. And then there's many stories. In fact, I was just on a webinar right before I hopped on this show, where one of our authors was interviewing executives from Target and from 3M, talking about ways that they were using the author's information to produce a more inclusive workforce. Okay, so if the author had not written that book, he never would have had the motivation to have these key executives in his sphere of influence, much less to be talking about some of his key ideas. So, there's all kinds of exciting ways that you can really dominate, scale, Helen, and get famous as a
Absolutely.
result of writing a book.
Absolutely, Bryan. I actually, through the process of working with Made for Success Publishing Company, I believe I learned so much, right? I thought writing a book, finishing my manuscript was 80% of publishing a book. And then I, through the process, learned that I was only 15 to 20% of getting a book done. So let's just share with the new people who have never written a book, what is the process? How do they get started?
Well, it's interesting. One of the authors that I work with, his dad took him aside and shared a quote, and this quote stuck with me. And here's the words of the father to his son. He said, "Son, reading books makes a broad man. Writing makes an exact man." And that was a really interesting thought process. So when I think of all the various things that can that an author can be thinking about, this really does come into focus. So Helen, you mentioned your book that is soon to be released. In fact, it's coming out within a month, called Ascend Your Startup. And I believe that this process stayed true to that thought that I just shared, where reading creates a broad woman and writing makes an exact woman. And in your book, you're talking about the 5 disconnects that founders typically have scaling their business. Well, it's exciting to talk about scaling a business. Now, the reason that you chose the title Ascend Your Startup is because you use a metaphor of scaling a mountain that's very similar to scaling revenues. And you talk about some of the challenges that authors have in the disconnects that they typically will come by. I fully expect, Helen, despite the fact that it's not on the market yet, but that this book will be a bestseller. I do believe that this book will catch the attention of publications like the Wall Street Journal because it's very well written and you've got a very broad platform. So in terms of taking an idea of accelerating product revenues and turning it into a book is a fame piece that will serve your needs as an influencer in great ways. So I'm glad you asked the question, though, about how to write a book. So, the author's journey is is typically not a straight line, right? It's just like a founder's journey or a executive for a very large Fortune 50 company. Their journeys of scaling a market will have many, many ups and downs, many setbacks, and it's the skilled executive that will figure out how to navigate all these aspects. But in writing a book, let's talk about that specifically, because that kind of gets to your question. How can listeners leverage a book to generate fame or to create awareness beyond any type of Google pay-per-click advertising or Facebook advertising or social media posting? How can we actually extend our ideas and get this earned media? Well, it always starts, and it's a fairly simple process, and I'll just whip through these because Helen, you've already done all this, right? But you first identify your target audience. Who is it that you intend to have to read your book? Many misconceptions that people have when they first come and work with Made for Success, our publishing company, is when I ask them, who do you think is going to read the book? And Helen, if you had to guess what they say, what's the answer that I hear the most if you had to guess?
They
Who's
don't
going to
know.
read my book?
They probably don't know.
They don't, but people say, everyone should read my book. Okay, so in the case of a book like yours, Ascend Your Startup, will everybody read that book?
No.
Well, let's think about it. If somebody reads books, the book industry is a $43 billion industry just in the US. And if I'm a romance reader and I read one romance novel per week, which is true of many romance readers, will they pick up Ascend Your Startup?
No.
Probably not. Yeah. So books aren't for everybody. They're definitely about a niche audience. So we first establish who the reader is and what their profile is. Then we need to figure out what's going to make them buy. Right. And Helen, you and I had many of these conversations when we were working on the positioning for Ascend Your Startup. We had to get into the mind of a founder or get into the mind of a Fortune 500 executive that's scaling a product and figure out what makes them tick. Okay. That's key. The third part of the writing journey is something that's a little bit proprietary to Made for Success, and that's what we call the hero's journey plan for writing a nonfiction book. Now, the hero's journey was devised by a guy named Joseph Campbell back with a book that he wrote in 1949. Mm-hmm. What could possibly be relevant about a book written in 1949? Well, he had this concept of the hero's journey. He wrote a book called The Hero with 1,000 Faces. And it's pretty much turned into a foundational philosophical piece for many screenwriters, for many authors, and we've modified that for nonfiction books. So we have a system or a plan for writing a nonfiction book based on a very popular storytelling method called the hero's journey. And in fact, if you were to go to Made for Success and click on our blog, I've posted about a dozen or so articles on the hero's journey writing method. So that's something that you can check out. The next step in the writing process, once you've figured out who's going to read it, why they're going to buy it, and you've got your writing plan, is then the actual writing yourself. So there's two ways to write a book. One, we set out a 90-day plan for authors to sit down, even busy executives, and carve out 2 days a week to write a book inside of 90 days. But there's a large number of authors who will choose to work with a ghostwriter. Some people feel that's controversial, but this is done all the time, even with big mega bestsellers. Oftentimes, a professional writer will have skills that we don't. If we're really good with cybersecurity, but we haven't trained in English literature, sometimes it does make sense to work with a writer. And then after all the writing is done, then the editor steps in and cleans up all of our mistakes, right? So when I write, in fact, the first book that I wrote was called Conversion Marketing, all about how to convert website visitors into paying customers. And in that, I talk about 30 different things that you can put on a website to convince people to make a buying decision, right? And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But after I wrote this information, I was in a stream of consciousness when I was writing. But you always have a good editor that that you can work with that will clean things up. Okay, and that's always required. Just like if you're writing code for a living, you always want to have a great QA process on the back end of that.
Absolutely. Bryan, I'm so glad I found you after finishing the manuscript. I wish I find you sooner, as a matter of fact, because writing Ascend Your Startup was incredibly personal for me, right? Nothing makes me happier than being able to share this book with the world. And my ultimate hope is that it becomes a catalyst needed for any startup out there to reach the top of the mountain. But the reason I selected you, I actually interviewed more than 10 publishers. The reason I selected Made for Success Publishing is because of you, right? I think our conversation made me think I really don't need much of the writing support, but I need someone with a strategic mindset to be my Sherpa, to walk me through the journey, right? Knowing that you've done this repeatedly, working with other authors, that give me the comfort level of working with you. And I'm so glad I made the right choice because, we've been working together for 3 months and everything you and your team has done to date meets and exceeds my expectations. So thank you for doing that.
It's been a real pleasure. And, a lot of people will ask, well, why should I write a book?
Exactly.
And what are the benefits? And you're living this literally right now. But, there's the fame and fortune aspect of being able to get the earned media. There's the bestseller credential, kind of like what Scott Hogel, the author of Persuade and the executive with iHeartRadio, he's carried this bestseller credential with him for years, and it's opened doors for him in ways that are pretty amazing. Did you know that there's a lot of surveys out there, Helen, where people will ask folks, what's the most respected profession in the world? And I came across one of these surveys, and the number one most popular response was that of a brain surgeon.
Wow.
But the second was that of an author.
Interesting.
So if you think about, if you're looking to earn professional respect for your product or your ideas or for career advancement, boy, a book is a great way to do that. Now, as a result, I wrote a book. My second book was called #1 bestseller, Book Marketing Reinvented. And because I wrote that, I was invited to go to Kauai for a insurance industry event where only the elite, the top elite performers in the insurance industry were invited. And I was invited to speak for an hour and rub elbows. So I've been invited to exotic locations. I've had the opportunity to speak and to travel, which are things that I enjoy very much, all as a result of writing that book.
Interesting.
Yeah. So career advancement, visibility within your company, these are all reasons why people will take that 90-day challenge and through a system that we call the Draft a Book experience, and get their ideas on paper.
Yeah, absolutely. As I was going through the process of writing my book, it really helped me crystallize some of the things I learned over the years, right, myself. Because I think when you try to put a framework on paper, that's quite different than you just go ahead and do it on a daily basis. So I've learned so much through that process myself. Um, I also, I talk to a lot of, I get to work with top executives, different sizes of company, right? Some of the people made comments about, hey, I just don't have the drive to write the book. That's not for me. Can you comment on that? Do you think that, it requires the drive to write a book?
Yeah, well, it is an interesting question. When I do sit down with authors, I'm very clear that writing a book is the territory of the ambitious. It puts you in the top 1%. So it's not a casual endeavor. And there's there's a lot of hard work that goes into it.
Mhm.
But for those people that are ambitious and they do want to take the ultimate step of sharing their ideas in writing and being published and getting all the respect and accolades of potentially even being a best-selling author, it throws doors wide open.
Mhm.
So yeah, uh, carving out 90 days. But let's look at it like this, Helen. This is actually an interesting way to think about it. So every year, there are 2 million people that will decide to run a marathon.
Mhm.
Okay. So Helen, I'm not a personal trainer,
Yeah.
but if you were to come to me and say, hey, what does it take to run a marathon? I would say, okay, well, let's set up a training routine for 9 months
Mhm.
where you're going to run 5 days a week. Let's change your diet, and let's change your schedule so you've got time to work out.
Mhm.
Okay. We'll do that for 90 days, and then you'll be ready to run 26 miles in 5-6 hours, right? Okay. So, but what does it take to write a book? Well, we've got a system that only takes 90 days.
Mm.
Okay. So it's not quite as ambitious as running a marathon. And you could probably think of somebody that you know that's run a marathon, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So writing a book, yeah, it does take discipline. It takes carving out time, maybe watching a little less TV, maybe spending a little less time doing some of your recreational activities, maybe even carving a little time out of your work schedule. Myself, when I'm in writing mode, I get up at 4:30 in the morning and I write till 7:30, right?
Yeah.
So, I'm a little dog-eared at work during those days, but I'm still getting my job done when I'm in writing mode, okay? Um, you do that for 2 days a week for 90 days,
Mhm.
uh, and you are right there at the finish line for having your book ready for an editor to start working on it.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo what you just said, Brian. It took me longer because it was my first time writing a book. It was
Mhm.
about, I started July last year. It was, end to end finishing manuscript took me 5 months. But you're right, every week I carve out at least 2 days, not the entire day, but half of the day, each, mostly Saturday and Sundays to work on the book. But during the week, I would have to think about the storylines and what we're going to put in there. So
Yeah.
it was a commitment, right? Not just from time perspective, but also you have to have your mind set for that. And then,
Mhm.
but I think after working with your company, the Made for Success publishing company, the editor Katie, she is phenomenal. Right? She was able to point
Mhm.
out things I never thought about, that when I was, as a writer, the first time author for a book, she was able to provide some guidance, very meaningful guidance along the way. I'm really happy to see where we are at with the book. And then I'm so excited about the release of the book on May
Yeah.
25th.
Yeah. So, we talk about this 90-day time frame, and we talk about one of our editors, Katie.
Mhm.
Um, so today we're doing a writing project with
Mhm.
with an NFL coach,
Mhm.
a retired strength coach for the NFL, and with a tight end
Yeah.
with the NFL. And they're all mid-process. One of them
Mhm.
got the project done in 90 days.
Wow. Yeah.
One of them is about 1/3 through the process. I'm not sure if he's going to finish, right? The third one is a year into it, okay, for
Mhm.
various reasons,
Yeah.
you know, being in the playoffs and whatnot, and you know, a whole host of reasons why.
Mhm.
But everybody has their different journey.
Yeah.
Everybody has a different timeline. There is no right or there is no wrong for getting it done. Um, you know, the biggest part of it, really, if you get right down to it, is making the commitment and then telling somebody that you respect that you're going to do it.
Yeah. And finding the right Sherpa.
Not only finding a Sherpa.
Yeah.
That's
Absolutely.
yeah.
And how can people reach you, Bryan?
Yeah. Well, if anybody is interested in asking questions about writing a book, I would encourage you to visit madeforsuccess.com and hit the contact page. And when you hit the contact page, I'm going to give you a couple things to do as a result. I'm going to ask you to tell me why you want to write a book in the comments.
Mhm.
I want you to mention Helen's name in the response field. And I'm going to send you, if you go through those steps, I'm going to send you a copy of Helen's book, Ascend Your Startup. Okay. Now, what did I just do there? And this is kind of interesting from a conversion marketing standpoint. This is important for founders, especially for founders of startups. We talked about a call to action, right? And I wasn't shy about saying, come and contact me. 2, I created a little commitment on your part. Tell me why you want to get in touch. 3. And then 3, I came up with a incentive, so a hook for you to take that action. Okay. These are things that you can do on your own website. This is what the whole idea behind conversion marketing, the first book that I wrote, is all about. It's about creating urgency. It's creating a reason for people to act. But all that aside, all the marketing tactics aside, I genuinely want to hear from you. I genuinely want to hear about your ideas and would love to touch base and have the conversation. So yeah, just come to madeforsuccess.com, hit contact us, and we'll get back in touch.
That's excellent advice, Bryan. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I'm sure the audience will benefit from watching this. I look forward to releasing the book, working with you in the next months. We'll see you soon. Take care.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot, Helen. It's been a pleasure.